Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into something pretty profound, the journey towards meaning. We're going on a bit of a cinematic, philosophical exploration here, looking at how we can actually shift from being just passive passengers in our own lives to becoming the active architects of our reality. Look, if you've ever felt like you're just on autopilot, kind of letting circumstance dictate your days, this analysis is going to completely reframe how you look at the time you have left. We're going to unpack the actual mechanics of purpose and see how our daily choices, our core beliefs, and our everyday actions literally build the life we end up living. Right off the bat, let's anchor ourselves with this quote from our source material. Every life is shaped by the choices made within it. I really want to establish the absolute weight of choice here. We talk a lot about destiny like it's fates or chance or something written in the stars. But the reality is actually so much more empowering and, honestly, a bit more demanding. Destiny isn't a dice roll. It's a canvas, and it's painted entirely by our deliberate decisions. Every single person has the right to decide how their story unfolds. It rests solely on what you decide to do today and the actual sweat equity you put into it.
And that brings us right into section 1, the weight of choice. So the first huge light bulb moment on this journey is understanding how we make, or importantly, how we don't make our decisions. The sources make this brilliant, kind of scary point. Avoiding a decision isn't itself a decision. It draws the battle lines of how we live. On one side, you've got the path of life. That's when we just drift aimlessly, letting habits, expectations, or just pure chance steer the ship. On the flip side is the deliberate life. This is when you grab the wheel with clear direction, sustained intention, and real belief. Living fully means actively engaging with what's happening in front of you instead of hiding from it. But here's the real kicker. The value lies in choosing, rather than choosing perfectly. Think about how often we totally paralyze ourselves because we're terrified of making the wrong move. We've all been there, right? It's like endlessly scrolling through Netflix for 45 minutes because you don't want to pick the wrong movie, and then you just end up going to sleep. We sit around waiting for the flawless plan, but our sources remind us that waiting for perfection just leaves the choice unclaimed. What actually matters is the courage to decide, to commit to a path, and just put things into motion. Which leads us perfectly into section 2, the cost of indecision. Okay, so if we know we need to choose, what exactly is keeping us stuck? Well, it usually boils down to procrastination. We take uncomfortable tasks and we just set them aside, kind of quietly hoping they'll fix themselves. But ignoring a warning light on your dashboard doesn't fix the engine, right? It just adds tangled layers to our lives until we're forced into a messy reckoning later on. So let's redefine procrastination. It isn't just you being lazy on the couch. It creates a literal limbo. It's a decision left unmade that solves absolutely nothing. And because our time is finite, unresolved choices don't mean you avoided a problem, they mean you lost potential. But it's not just procrastination. We are also incredibly bound by our own perceptions. Our negative assumptions act as invisible boundaries. Think of it like that old story of a baby elephant tied to a stake. By the time it grows into a massive adult, it could snap that tiny rope in a second, but it doesn't even try because it assumes it's still stuck. That is an inherited assumption. If you don't actually believe an outcome is possible, you're not going to try. So much of what feels totally impossible to us is just a product of these false boundaries. When we dwell on habitual negative thoughts, we start believing these shadows are solid brick walls. Let's shift our momentum a bit and get into section 3, belief, effort, and reward. We've talked a lot about what holds us back, but here is the amazingly empowering flip side. Life actually doesn't have to be this relentless uphill battle. If we can manage those negative thought loops and put in genuine effort, the ceiling is practically limitless. The source material uses this fantastic, super practical metaphor for meaningful change. It's literally just like a recipe. Step 1, gather your ingredients, meaning identify the resources you have. Step 2, combine them in the right proportions to build your plan. And step 3, give it time and attention. Be patient. This scales perfectly whether you're making a cup of coffee or changing your entire career path. You can't bake a cake by just staring at flour and eggs. You need structured preparation and patience to get the result. And as you follow that recipe, keep this in your back pocket. Effort generally scales with how much is genuinely wanted. Meaningful achievement has very little to do with luck. The persistent, exhausting, sometimes super uncomfortable effort you're willing to put in is directly tied to how clearly you want the end goal. If your desire is crystal clear, you are so much more likely to apply the grit needed to actually see it through. Let's move on to section 4, making days an adventure.
All right, so we've looked at the big philosophical picture, but what about just a random, boring Tuesday? The absolute danger of a comfortable life is unbroken repetition. If we're going to build a meaningful life, we have to start treating ordinary days like actual opportunities for fresh curiosity. Routine shouldn't be the ceiling of your existence. Decide in advance what your day is going to look like instead of just letting it happen to you. Stay open to new connections because you'd be totally surprised by how much direction comes from just sincerely interacting with other people. And value all your experiences, the huge wins and the crushing setbacks. That variety is exactly what gives your life its texture.
And remember, value hides in the tiny, everyday stuff. Even those unbidden, totally unwanted, or difficult moments carry the potential to become deeply meaningful. Sometimes a seemingly trivial event holds a lesson that outweighs its size by a mile. Once we start examining those moments and extracting the useful bits, we turn just getting through the day into a source of real, lasting meaning.
Which brings us to our final stop, Section 5, Building a Meaningful Life. Okay, so we're addressing the ultimate question here. We're making choices, fighting procrastination, putting in the effort. What does it all actually add up to? It reinforces the idea that purpose isn't hiding under a rock waiting for you to stumble over it. It's actively constructed by you. If you map out the arc of almost any undertaking, a new hobby, a business, or an entire lifespan, it looks like this. Day 1 is pure potential. Year 10 brings growth, sure, but also stagnation and huge trajectory-shifting decisions. And year 80 is the end, where we look back with either deep satisfaction or serious regret. The beautiful takeaway here is that every single stage on this timeline remains completely open to your influence, as long as you're paying attention.
Because here's the secret. Meaning isn't a fixed answer waiting to be discovered. The meaning of life is actually a question. What significance are you deliberately going to bring to it? That search, through the connections you make, the goals you crush, the joy you find, that is the search that justifies the effort of living. It's a house you build yourself, brick by brick, day by day. And because of that, your identity is never, ever locked in stone. The source material puts it perfectly. A useful way to think about identity is as something actively built rather than fixed from the outset. You are constantly evolving. You aren't the exact same person you were 12 months ago, and you won't be the same person next year. It's a fluid work in progress, which means you have the power to reconsider your path and set a completely new course whenever you decide to. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a question to chew on today. Is your life many distinct days, or is it just one repeated pattern, playing on a loop again and again? Remember, you're the one holding the pen to your story. Challenge those routines. Take the time you have left, break the loop, and start pursuing what genuinely matters to you. Thanks so much for joining me today, and I really hope you start making those deliberate choices right now.